Chapter 3: The Acceptance of Lesser Standards, the Universal Pivot Point of Decline. Every civilization reaches a moment when it can no longer maintain the standards that once defined its rise. This moment is quiet, structural, and almost always invisible at the time. It is the point where the system's complexity exceeds the available capability of its operators, and the leadership, implicitly or explicitly, chooses survival over integrity. The decision is simple: either uphold the original standards and allow the system to fail immediately, or lower those standards to keep it functioning a little longer. This is the universal pivot point of decline. It is not failure of morality. It is failure of arithmetic. The mechanism begins far earlier than most societies realize. As explained in the Physics of Empire, civilizations are founded by a concentrated minority of unusually capable individuals. Their competence saturates the early system. They operate with clarity, discipline, and efficiency because the administrative and logistical machinery is still simple enough for exceptional individuals to control directly. Expansion changes this balance. Complexity rises rapidly: new provinces, laws, infrastructure, supply chains, and institutional layers. Capability does not rise at the same rate. Eventually, the empire becomes too large, too intricate, and too interconnected for its founding elite to manage. It must transition from elite management to mass administration. This transition is where the first fracture appears. The empire now needs thousands of competent operators where previously it needed dozens. But as Chapter 2 demonstrated, the demographic trap reduces the supply of high-capability individuals precisely when demand peaks. High-skill cohorts shrink. Birth rates fall fastest among the most capable. The children of the founders, administrators, engineers, and officers become numerically insufficient to staff the system their parents built. The empire enters a structural mismatch, rising complexity against a thinning capability base. At first, the system continues functioning because the final generation trained under high standards remains in place. These legacy operators mask the problem. They correct errors, compensate for incompetence, and maintain performance levels that incoming cohorts cannot match. Their presence creates the illusion of stability, while the underlying capability density is already collapsing. This is the most deceptive phase of imperial life. The system is already failing, but no one can see it because the last competent generation is holding it together through experience alone. As the mismatch grows, leaders face unavoidable symptoms. Administrative delays increase. Census records become inconsistent. Tax collection varies regionally. Engineering projects fall behind schedule. Military units report recruitment shortfalls. Infrastructure backlogs expand. Each symptom carries the same root cause. The system now requires an average level of competence that the population no longer provides. The leadership faces its pivot point. The first standards to fall are recruitment standards. They must. Militaries relax physical, cognitive, or literacy thresholds. Civil services accept lower credentials. Technical agencies hire individuals who would not have passed earlier examinations. Apprenticeships shorten. Training cycles compress. Universities expand enrollment, while diluting curriculum difficulty. These changes are rarely described as decline. They are framed as necessary adaptation, expansion, or modernization. But beneath the language is a structural reality. The empire is lowering standards because it can no longer recruit enough capable individuals to meet the original bar. Once recruitment standards fall, training standards follow. Armies reduce the duration of drills. Administrative academies abandon rigorous instruction. Professional guilds lose disciplinary authority. Officer schools promote candidates who would previously have been filtered out. Universities shift from mastery to credential distribution. Institutions become credential-rich and competence-poor. Each adjustment is incremental and therefore politically acceptable, but cumulatively they destroy capability density. The decline becomes self-reinforcing. Lower capability recruits require lower standards to progress through training. Lower training produces weaker operators. Weaker operators require simplified processes. Simplified processes reduce institutional competence further. The empire enters a loop in which standards fall because capability falls, and capability falls further because standards fall. Decline becomes structural. The moment the legacy operators retire, this degradation becomes visible. Performance collapses not gradually but suddenly. Infrastructure outages increase. Repairs take longer. Road networks degrade. Ports become inefficient. Courts slow. Procurement errors multiply. Military units exhibit inconsistent performance. Tax systems lose precision. Postal networks become unreliable. Inconsistency, once rare, becomes normal. Predictability dissolves. Citizens experience this as a shift in daily life: longer wait times, administrative confusion, contradictory instructions, increased error rates, and the widespread feeling that nothing works the way it used to. This perception is accurate. The system is now operated by cohorts whose training, competence, and discipline fall far below the standards under which the system was originally designed. Historical evidence shows this process physically. After the collapse of Rome, aqueducts, the pinnacle of engineering precision, were dismantled stone by stone and repurposed into farmhouses and boundary walls. The population inherited infrastructure they no longer possessed the capability to maintain. Complex systems became liabilities. Later generations reverted to simpler structures they could understand and operate. Roads eroded because drainage systems were misunderstood. Sewage networks collapsed because maintenance routines were forgotten. This was not cultural regression. It was capability regression. The complexity of the infrastructure exceeded the skill of the population, and so the infrastructure was cannibalized. The same pattern appears today in digital form. Modern software platforms accumulate code written by earlier, more capable teams. As standards decline and staffing expands, institutional memory fades. Companies lower hiring thresholds to scale. Legacy engineers retire. Newer cohorts cannot maintain the inherited complexity. Critical subsystems become untouchable because no one fully understands them. Errors increase. Workarounds multiply. Features break without explanation. Systems built by high-capability teams begin to fail because the present generation cannot sustain the standard required to operate them. This is the modern equivalent of dismantling an aqueduct to build a wall. Complexity becomes a burden. Simplicity becomes survival. Institutional decline is not uniform. Systems degrade in predictable order depending on their dependency on high-capability individuals. Military performance often declines early, especially in forces requiring discipline, initiative, and technical skill. Administrative precision follows. Infrastructure maintenance fails later because physical systems degrade slowly, but once deterioration begins, it accelerates. Legal systems degrade more gradually but eventually suffer delays, inconsistent judgments, and weakened enforcement. Across all domains, quality control is the first casualty. Once standards fall, oversight collapses. Mistakes multiply. Corruption rises because institutions no longer possess the competence to detect, investigate, or punish it reliably. The system becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability destroys trust. Eventually, the empire reaches the point of irreversible decline. Even if leadership recognizes the structural cause, rare in any era, it cannot reverse it. It cannot instantly regenerate a demographic cohort. It cannot rebuild high-capability training institutions when those institutions are staffed by graduates of diluted systems. It cannot raise standards without triggering immediate functional collapse. Reforms become cosmetic, agencies are reorganized, departments renamed, procedures rewritten, but capability does not rise because the human capital no longer exists. At this stage, the empire enters terminal contraction. Decision-making slows. Strategic vision narrows. Economic productivity declines as lower-capability managers misallocate resources. Military failures increase. Rival powers apply pressure. Internal factions compete for influence within weakening institutions. Citizens fragment into distrustful blocs. The civilization shrinks, territorially, economically, administratively, or culturally, until it stabilizes at a level of complexity it can still operate. The acceptance of lesser standards is therefore the hinge upon which imperial decline turns. It is the structural pivot from which all downstream failures emerge. Every empire in history has confronted this point. None have avoided the consequences. Once the civilization can no longer produce enough capable individuals to operate the complexity it inherited, standards must fall, and once they fall, the arc of decline becomes irreversible.